in addressing his people after the Wagner insurrection briefly looked to be the fatal twist in the Russian war against Ukraine. He said, "Anyone who chooses the path of evil destroys himself." For a long time, Russia used propaganda to mask its weakness and the stupidity of its government, and now there is so much chaos that no lie can hide it, Zelensky's words. What cannot be hidden are the advances around Bakhmut that Ukrainian forces have attempted in the last 48 hours since the Wagner group turned their attention to Moscow. So how have the Ukrainian people reacted to the fallout this weekend? And are they hoping that this is where the tide turns towards a victory for Ukraine? Joining us now to talk about that, Cormac Smith. Cormac was Strategic Communications Advisor to Ukraine's former Foreign Affairs Minister, Pavlo Klimkin, from 2016 to 2018. Good evening, Cormac.
Nick, good evening to you.
So, what do you make of the events of the last week?
Well, if I'm very, very honest, I'm still trying to unravel them. It has been very strange indeed. But, you know, I've been speaking over the weekend and today with a number of friends back in Kyiv and indeed in Ukrainian embassies in different cities. One of the most common words I heard was popcorn, and Kyiv and parts of Ukraine were running out of popcorn as people were ordering the popcorn in to watch what was happening. The general consensus seems to be among everybody I'm speaking to and getting their sense of other people is, look, it would have been better if the coup had gone ahead, but nevertheless, the consensus is that this has fatally weakened Vladimir Putin. A lot of people I'm speaking to are talking about the beginning of the end for Putin. More importantly, the Ukrainians, and I would say this is more evidence that Russia is indeed a failed state. And you compare that to Ukraine, which for the last 30 years has made steady progress on their reforms and, you know, is even continuing with its reform agenda through the teeth of this genocidal war. So it's an interesting juxtaposition between a clearly failing state on the one hand and a state, you know, I spent a lot of time at the Ukraine Reconstruction Conference last week in London. I was speaking to a lot of Ukrainians. There's a huge focus on, you know, despite the war that's on at the moment, winning the war and then reconstructing their country and building it back better. So I would sum up by saying that the vast majority of Ukrainian people are very, very happy with this. Russia's difficulty they see as Ukraine's opportunity.
But of Vladimir Putin, his authority has been brought into question quite publicly. Do you think that that is the sort of thing that will make him redouble his efforts?
No, I don't. And this is my personal opinion, because I think in weakening Putin's authority, it is weakening his ability to run what is effectively a mafia organization, not a legitimate state in the way that you or I, who are lucky to live in Britain, in our case, or anybody else who lives in a functioning Western democracy. So I don't think... I read something by Garry Kasparov, the great chess grandmaster, who is one of the foremost... he's obviously in exile from Russia, but he's one of the foremost members of the Russian pro-democracy organization, and I follow quite closely what he says. And he has made the point that doubling down on Ukraine would be a major mistake for Putin. He is weak, and the people that follow him now are going to start thinking twice, and they're going to start thinking about what side they want to be on.
What about Prigozhin himself, then? Has he been actually stripped of the force that he used to command? Has he gone to Belarus on his own, essentially, or does he still command the Wagner group?
I've got to say, Nick, I don't know, and that is not yet clear to me under exactly what terms he has gone to Belarus. We do know that up to the point that the coup was called off, because he laughably said that he didn't want to shed any blood, and this is somebody, you know, who's known for smashing in people's heads with sledgehammers because they deserted. You know, the Wagner group has a horrendous reputation for war crimes and so forth. So he had 25,000 Wagner troops. I think the big question is not so much what the generals and the oligarchs and the big people will do, but what the soldiers on the ground will do. And remember that his Wagner fighters, many of whom were released convicts, have fought shoulder to shoulder in the trenches with the regular Russian army. So I think the question is, among these soldiers who are already very badly treated, whichever side they're on, who they are going to give their loyalty to. Unfortunately, Russians are a people that don't thirst after democracy; they thirst after power. And the one thing I would make very clear is this guy Prigozhin. I would have thought he's possibly even worse than Putin, but I don't know that. But he is certainly as bad as Putin ever was, and this was something I started to learn back in 2014 when I started to go to this part of the world to do work. So, but I'm afraid, no, I can't offer you any clarity of how much power, whether he's effectively under house arrest, whether he's at the mercy of Lukashenko, who obviously is in Putin's pocket. I think there's still a lot that we do not understand. And certainly I spoke to a very senior Ukrainian diplomat about half an hour before I came on tonight. And, he emphasized, one, they think it's very good news, but two, they exercise that they will proceed with extreme caution. They don't expect any massive differences on the military front at the front line, because most of the Russian soldiers, to be honest, won't even be aware of this. So it's not going to change anything instantly on the front line. And the Ukrainians, I think, will be more wary than any of us of any possibilities of a deception or a trap. So they will continue with the military plans and the shaping operations that they have been undertaking for the last 2 weeks in the counteroffensive. The main counteroffensive, I think I can tell you, has not really begun yet. They're doing a lot of probing and to determine weaknesses and so forth.
Now, Prigozhin complained loudly and often about a lack of weapons and ammunition for his troops. How well stocked are the Ukrainian forces these days?
Well, from what we know, there was some concern earlier on in the summer as to the ability of the Allies to supply ammunition at the rate the Ukrainians were using it. From everything I have known, from everything that I know, the situation has been improving over the summer. Two things. One, I'm reliably informed the Ukrainians are getting the ammunition they need, but more importantly, of course, we have seen them finally get the battle tanks, the modern battle tanks, thanks largely to the work of the Brits in donating the Challengers back in February to unlock the logjam. They're now getting the long-range artillery, thanks again to the Brits for supplying Storm Shadow, which brings the range of their artillery from 80 kilometres up to 250 kilometres. And these were two of the weapon systems they've been crying out for from the start. And of course, Joe Biden, only 2 or 3 weeks ago, has relented on allowing them to have F-16s. So they are still going to take a little bit of time to get in place. And I'm not a military man, and Nick, as you know, but I listen to the military men. But there seems to be an opinion that absolute success in the counteroffensive is quite possibly going to need air superiority, and that is going to take some time to get the modern Western battle jets in. So, sorry, that was a long-winded answer. The short answer is everything I know. They're getting more and more of the heavy weapons they need, and they're getting the ammunition that they need. Everything that's happened this weekend points to Russia being a failed state, and everything we've been seeing from Ukraine, I have got to say, gives us a lot of confidence that Ukraine is on the right path to improving its democracy, to dealing with its corruption, and becoming a fully fledged member of both the European Union and maybe NATO in due course. That obviously won't happen until the war is over.
Now, you talked a lot about democracy. That's not something that Vladimir Putin has to be concerned about, but we in the West, or the leaders in the West, do, because they're always looking at the next election.
Yeah.
And do you think that it's possible that people, the electorate, will tire of this? Will sort of, there'll be an element of boredom because it's the same story over and over again, but also they'll be thinking, well, why are we sending all of this money over there when we've got people sleeping in doorways and so on? And the possibility of the Americans, voting for Donald Trump, for instance, who has expressed an unwillingness to actually keep funding this war. Is it actually in Putin's interest to just keep dragging this out until we in the West can't stand it anymore?
Time is much more on Putin's side than it's on Ukraine's side. There's no doubt about that. Ukraine with the support of ourselves and the other allies, need to bring this to a conclusion sooner rather than later. The longer it goes on, the more it plays into Putin's hands, if Putin is going to be around that long, and that is a big if at the moment. On the second point, or on your first question about public support, I think this is always a concern, and obviously what I do, like speaking to people like yourself, it's something that I am very, very aware of. But I think, there are two reasons to support Ukraine. One is the fact that there is actually genocide being committed in a European country in 2023. And if we value the quality of life that we have and the principles and that we live by, I would say that this is something that the majority, probably the overwhelming majority of decent Brits would want to keep supporting. Certainly Britain at every level has been a huge supporter of Ukraine. There will be some people who will be tiring of it. But the other thing is, this is a wider threat to the rules-based order. And if you look at the countries that are already in Putin's pocket, the Irans and the Belaruses and the North Koreas and the Syrias, but also China is a very big worry. And to put it very, very simply, China is, despite their no-limits friendship, which they talk about, there are very clearly limits on that, and China is clearly not arming Russia to the degree that Russia would like. China will get involved if we weaken in the West. And if China gets involved and goes all in behind Russia, I would suggest all of us are in trouble, because China is a country that has currently, I think, about 14 times the size of economy of Russia. Russia is going south. China is projected to outstrip the U.S. economy by 2030. So I think there's a much bigger issue at stake here, which is the survival of our rules-based order, which may not be perfect, but it has given us the greatest period of peace and prosperity the world has ever known since the end of the Second World War. And I think even if people don't care enough, as I obviously do, I'm a friend of Ukraine, and that's why I do this. But certainly the vast majority of Brits that I've come across, or polls that I've seen, I believe that they will keep supporting Ukraine. But it is a battle. And of course, it's a battle where, Russia fights in the information space with disinformation and so forth. I saw one of these petitions to Parliament today that have got up to about 10,000 signatures, and it's to basically say that the British government should immediately stop supporting Ukraine and press for peace negotiations, which of course is exactly what Vladimir Putin wants. Now, I'm in the process of looking into this with other people, but it does seem that there is Russian influence behind this particular petition. As you know, anybody is at liberty to put one of these petitions together. So there's Russian disinformation and interference at play on a lot of different areas, and that will seek to drive public opinion away from supporting Ukraine and obviously focusing on cost of living and so forth. But if I could say one more thing, Britain currently spends about $2.5 billion on supporting Ukraine. Now that is not a small piece of money, but it's about 4.4% of our total defence budget. And other partners like the US are spending a similar amount of their defence budget. In the greater scheme of things, one, to prevent the appalling genocide which is going on in Ukraine at the moment, but also to secure our very way of life going in the decades going forward, it's probably a fairly small price to pay. And, you know, a successful Ukraine will make the world, will make certainly all of us in Europe, whether we're in the EU or not, will make all of us in Europe, I would suggest, a lot more secure and also a lot more wealthy. As I said, I was at the Ukraine Recovery Conference, and when you look at the potential, and I learned this when I was out there, the potential that a rebuilt democratic Ukraine firmly on the side of the West has, it will be an asset to all of us.
Very good to talk to you, Cormac. Thanks so much for your time. Cormac Smith.